Parkdale. And we are delighted to do a whole show. Not that we don't do every show on women and by women, but this show's special because tomorrow's December 6th, and those of us who will remember that was, this is the anniversary of the massacre at École Polytechnique, where women were killed because they were women. This is a long time since then, but we're going to be talking about violence against women with some activist women, starting with Colleen Burke. Colleen, one of our Women of Steel live and in studio. For past 13 years, she served as co-chair of the Women of Steel Committee, shop steward and recording secretary, and represents 8,000 administrative and technical workers at the University of Toronto, which is, of course, where we broadcast from. We also have in the studio Teddy Credguer. Teddy's known as the Marrying Lady. She officiated at the huge marriage that happened at Pride a few years back. I remember it well. And she's co-chair of the Human Rights Committee at the Union. She's been organizing the STEELwool initiative to raise awareness regarding safe workplace policies and Bill 132, which we'll talk about as well, and what they're doing to commemorate December 6th, but also where we're at. We're now in a post-Trump era. You heard, if you were listening to Democracy Now!, that our Prime Minister has just okayed more pipelines, so we're in for the fight of our lives up here. And by the way, congratulations to all the activists and everyone online around the world, really, that won that victory for the Sioux in North Dakota against their pipeline. So we'll go on fighting that. And quite frankly, a whole lot of women were behind that too. So here we are, women activists. We're going to be talking. And about halfway through, we're going to get a call in from Sandra Jansen. Sandra is the woman who walked across the aisle from the Conservatives to the New Democrats in Alberta. And she did something quite unprecedented. She stood up in the House and talked about all the names she'd been called on social media as a woman in public life. And I was inspired by that and did the same. You can find that on my Facebook, and talked about all the names I had been called, including people telling me I should be raped, et cetera, hundreds of them over the years. Interestingly enough, and we'll start with this, many of the men in the House came over to me and said that they never received anything like that. I mean, they got pissed off emails and, Twitter feeds, and they have trolls too, but nothing to do with their gender, nothing to do with them as men, and not anywhere near the violence and the hatred that women get. So what do you think that's about? Colleen, let's start with you. Why is this still happening? Why is it still happening?
Well, I guess the short answer is we're still living in a patriarchy. And I think the difference is that you're right, there are trolls everywhere. Male newspaper columnists, male politicians, male public figures all get it, but it doesn't have that gendered, sexualized attack as part of the response. And we've seen this so much. So many, Heather Malik has talked about this quite a bit in the Toronto Star, the kinds of attacks that she gets online. Yourself, the very famous speech from a politician in Australia about misogyny that she faced right in the House of Commons. And I think things haven't changed that much as women are allowed a certain amount of space to move up, but if they get a little too uppity, then they need to be brought back down, and this is the tool to do it. And unfortunately, and I'm glad that women are naming it, because I think a lot of people suffer in silence, and it just has to be named again and again and again until it becomes as unacceptable as a racial slur, which is still out there, but people don't have the same tolerance for that they do for this gendered stuff that you should. Even Rosie DiManno had a column about, oh, these whiny female politicians, what are they talking about? Everybody gets this. They should just suck it up. So there's still just so much education to be done.
Teddy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think it's just basically used as a tool to incite fear and to keep women from talking. The more that you can incite that fear and jab at them, the less that they're going to feel like they can speak up, and unless people get together and say, no, this is not appropriate, and say, I'm still going to keep talking, I'm still going to be out there, and you're just going to have to deal with it.
The sad reality, though, is that I'm a woman of a certain age, and we really thought this would change with the generations, especially as mothers of sons, many of us. We thought, well, all these feminists, the second wave of feminism came along, we all birthed, we had children. We thought, first of all, we thought our daughters would grow up in a better world where they wouldn't be subject to this, or at least as much. And we thought our sons would grow up to be a different kind of men, and that has proven not to be so. That's pretty shocking. Any response?
Well, I think there are a lot of different types of men. I mean, I think if you look at maybe the reactions you're getting from your colleagues versus women politicians 50 years ago and the kind of absolutely blatant sexism they were getting right in the House. I mean, John Crosby calling Sheila Copp's baby and, all that kind of stuff. I think that isn't there. But I think the internet in particular gives us anonymity and safety for people to be absolutely hateful, really, really hateful things that they would not say in a public venue. They would be too afraid to say it in public, but behind their little computers they can, be as powerful as they think. So I think that's part of the dynamic. But I do think it has improved, but there's a long, long, long way to go.
Yeah, and of course we should state that it's even worse for women of color, First Nations women, women with disabilities, queer women. I mean, again, it's on a continuum, but some women suffer more than other women. Teddy, why is it still with us? Why is it so entrenched?
I think you just nailed it, actually. I think that it's actually escalating into other areas of people who trans people, and it's moving. So just a year ago in September, this is when we had threats at the university against women. And just recently we had it again appearing with more gender-biased language and the faculty choosing not to use it and really kind of gaining momentum around that.
It was horrendous. Do you think Trump's election... My feeling is there's kind of a Pandora's box been opened to a little bit lately where people think, we got one of our own in the White House. It's okay.
Absolutely.
It's okay to be racist and sexist and, homo and transphobic. Do you think that, have you experienced any uptake?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just did a women's sweat with a number of women from various different ethnic backgrounds. And what really came up in our road trip was that they are listening to a lot of social media and experiences that women are having down in the States, but even here in Canada, where threats are coming out against a woman in a hijab went to a gas station where she literally was held by gunpoint and told to leave, and if she didn't like it, their president would back them. Things like that are just absolutely disgusting to listen to.
Yeah. Well, we've seen swastikas in churches. We've seen incidents in subways. Colleen, Trump has something to do with it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the fact that someone who brags about sexually assaulting women is now the president of the United States is absolutely terrifying because it opens up space and legitimizes this kind of behavior and this kind of, whether it's sexual harassment or sexual violence or locker room talk, as he termed it, there's now a safe space for that. And I think as well, very, very much a safe space for racism and anti-Semitism. Absolutely, that he's opened up, and it's terrifying. And I think Canadians like to pat ourselves on the back that, we're not Americans, but that space is opening up here as well, and we need to really guard against it.
Absolutely. And of course, south of the border funding for organizations like Planned Parenthood and Watch Out for, some of the only places women can get health care south of the border. Well, I'll just recount a story, then we're going to move on to other sorts of violence against women, the real sorts of violence, not that emotional abuse and language words do hurt, but the actual killing of women. But I spoke at an anti-Trump rally recently and really quoted Michael Moore, who's got this "We Are All Muslim" campaign going in the States, where he's standing up with that sign in front of Trump. And that was the thing that really set people off. I mean, not only the fact that I'm a woman and I speak, but also the Islamophobia that came out of that comment was absolutely horrifying. And this was from Canadians. Like, I'm pretty sure they were catching the clips on CP24, so they were here for the most part. That's something, too, that, again, is unleashed with that Pandora's box of Trump's election. I think being opened. Is this something you've seen in your line of work and as women of steel?
I haven't encountered it directly, but I've certainly been following it in the news. I don't know if you have more personal experience of. I haven't been hearing anything in particular from our members, but people are on edge.
Yeah.
I think, anyone who stands out due to their ethnicity, their religion, their gender, they're on edge, wondering sort of what, has my safe space gotten even smaller than it was a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
I think working at the university too, I mean, it's actually just a more, I don't know how to put it, it's a little more thought out. It's a little more strategic. It's a little less obvious, I think, when people do experience bullying, harassment, that type of thing. It's not going to be as blatant. It's going to be a lot more subtle. It's going to be, or less, it's going to be.
Except for that professor who wouldn't use the pronouns for trans women. Let's name that.
Yes, but even doing so in a way that, backing it by saying it's academia and coming up with, I have a reasonable explanation for why I think that this is okay to be like this.
Yeah, freedom of speech umbrella that covers many racists and misogynists. But I have to tell you again, they had a panel. They gave him more airtime. And luckily, there was a trans woman who was also a professor here who spoke on that panel, and a legal expert who took him on. But CUPE called for a boycott of that, and I was outside kind of handing out things about our trans flag, because the very next day was the Trans Remembrance Day, when celebrating and mourning trans lives lost through violence. And the outpouring again on social media of his followers was quite amazing and quite disgusting, actually. A lot of misogyny and a lot of verbal abuse, not just trans abuse, but misogyny too. So it's out there. It's out there. It's here. It's here on campus. It's everywhere. We have to watch out for it. One thing, though, is that, and that this is most disturbing, I think, for somebody who's old like me, is that the incidence of killing women, of out-and-out women's deaths, has not really improved that much either over the decades. What do you think, again, that's about? I mean, we had a couple just recently in the news, surgeon who killed his doctor wife. I mean, this continues to go on, and it seems no matter what advertising campaigns the government does, no matter what we or unionists do in the workplace or fight for in the workplace, it's still happening. So in light of École Polytechnique and the massacre there, what can we do? Colleen?
That's a big question. I think violence against women is something that just unites all women, that every woman either has experienced it or fears experiencing it. And I think at every social strata, I mean, this doctor who was just murdered, to someone living on the street. It affects every single woman out there, and they may experience violence in various ways, but I think it is something that affects all women everywhere in the world. And you're right, I think every change we make is a little drop in the bucket, drop in the bucket, drop in the bucket. But, I don't think the murder rate for women is going down, and certainly missing and murdered Aboriginal women is a massive, massive issue that at least finally people are talking about. But you still see so much systemic racism in terms of how police deal with complaints of Aboriginal women. The cases in Quebec that just recently got thrown out for lack of evidence, people not being, missing women not being investigated until it's too late. There are just so many layers of patriarchy, misogyny, racism that need to be tackled to get to the root of this issue. I wish I had the answer and I could just snap my fingers, but here we are, 27 years after École Polytechnique, and it's the same thing every December 6th.
Now, Teddy, you're doing some pretty proactive and exciting stuff around this. Tell us
I was going to say, I don't think Colleen gives herself enough credit, because the key thing that brought me into the union and made me very active with the union is that I find that the union is there because we want to show that people are human beings on campus. They're not just human resources, and that we care about them as human beings. Things like being murdered doesn't come out of the blue. It starts with a system of abuse that starts, and having a place to go to and speak to people about it, that's where I think that we do have an impact and we can make a difference. And this is the reason why the idea of not just getting all the U of T staff together to make scarves, but to actually put it on display to say,
Tell us about that, because we haven't talked about that.
STEELwool is basically an initiative that started in September when Bill 132
And tell people what Bill 132 is
I'll
about.
let Colleen talk.
Yeah. Do you wanna-
Okay. So Bill 132 was the Sexual Violence and Harassment Plan Act, and it changed a number of different statutes in Ontario around these issues. So things like Landlord and Tenant Act that allow women to break their lease if they're leaving an abusive relationship. It makes all universities and colleges have a sexual violence policy for their students. And also in the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which is sort of where we come in as a union, it gives additional tools for investigation into workplace harassment and sexual harassment. So we think that it is a really valuable tool that is giving a lot more resources to workers to deal with these issues, and also a lot happening for students on campuses.
Right.
So now, and Teddy, what are you doing with that?
So STEELwool has been a major initiative we've had across all 3 campuses to recognize Bill 132 and the inclusion of the Sexual Harassment in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So the goal was to get 132 members to knit, crochet, or make in whatever way 132 scarves to create a giant art installation on campus for December 6th. So starting in September, we brought together people on campus who were novice knitters. They knit away with people who were beginning knitters, and just recognizing the demographics here on campus. We have a lot of women, although we had men participate in this project as well. And we now have over 180 volunteers that have been participating. That I know of. Scarves are still coming in by people I didn't even realize were out there knitting away. But the beauty of this type of a project is that they not only got to learn, to knit, to network. The art of doing something together collectively, I think, is very healing. And to be able to be in a room, it allowed us the ability to be able to talk to them about the bill, to let them know that we're there for them, to let them know what options are available to them. And I think by having this massive art installation, it's going to be at tomorrow from 10:30 till 2:30 at 12 Hart House Circle, just in front of Hart House here, and on each of the Mississauga and Scarborough campuses. But it shows something very visual that people can, again, continue to ask questions and to recognize that STEEL cares. They're cared for, and there are people that are out there that care about this bill, and they also want to make scarves for the homeless. They care about people in general. So I think just building, forget Trump. It's about building that positive, let's get together, let's do something positive together, and let's make it beautiful.
And by the way, if you've just tuned in, you're listening to 3 Women. I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, and we have in the studio 2 women of steel, Colleen Burke and Teddy Credguer, and they're talking about the project that's going to be on display at University of Toronto, but also the ongoing work of Women of Steel and the United Steelworkers, who've done some amazing things over the years in terms of civil rights for just about everyone. And talking about going forward, too, we should alert people to the fact that there will be a demonstration. There's going to be a Million Women March in Washington on Inauguration Day. Want to make sure that this gets out there. But we're going to have a sister march in Toronto. There's going to be a huge outpouring into the street on Inauguration Day here in January 21st. So keep your eyes peeled on social media for that. There are a lot of groups going to take part in that. For all of those who wanted to go to Washington, don't even try. I tried. It's impossible. Hotel rooms are like $2,000 a night, and even if you want to sleep on a floor somewhere, the floors are taken. So good on them. We hope they get the Million Women in Washington, but we're going to have a sizable showing here too. And by the way, we always love to hear from you. So we are live here at CIUT 89.5 FM, and you can call in at 416-946-7000 if you would like to contribute something to the conversation or to talk about something you're doing in your way or community to commemorate December 6th, the 27th anniversary of the massacre of women at L'École Polytechnique. And talking again about violence against women, we have yet another bill before us in the House, Peggy Sattler's bill. Doesn't look like it's going to pass. because this term is coming to the end, but we're hoping that the government brings it in as part of their workplace review. Colleen, do you want to talk about that bill? You raised it.
Sure, yeah. And actually, I think this sort of loops back to something Teddy was saying about people being human beings at work, and people bring their whole self to work. And sometimes that whole self is an abusive home or an abusive partner that follows you to work. And so we saw the initiative several years ago with Bill 168 to have a workplace violence plan for when that violence from home comes into the workplace. And I think that was a great initiative. And this is now the next step, which would be to provide paid time off for victims of sexual and domestic violence. And there have been a number of surveys about how this impacts women at work. Absenteeism, unexplained sick days, inability to concentrate, that women can often end up getting disciplined for poor job performance when it's the stress of being in an abusive relationship that's led them to this. And so this legislation, if it passes in this form or comes back in another, I think is a really, really important initiative. And I know the OFL is supporting it. Our local wrote a letter of support for this to give women who are in the situation some safety and some space, because that job is so important to them. That's a way out of a domestic violence situation, to have some economic autonomy. And so if on top of what's happening to you at home, you now lose your job because of all the fallout from this, it's a double whammy. So we're really quite excited to be supporting this. And whether the bill passes or not, this is going to be a priority for us for bargaining when we come up to bargain our contract in the new year. And I think the other unions on campus are looking at it as well.
Yeah, it's really shocking that sick pay is not, sick days are not paid for, period. But the fact that domestic violence victims can't get days off is even more distressing. Yeah, so hopefully that, I say it hasn't passed as a private member's bill this term, but the hope is that it comes back as government legislation, which would be major if it did. Again, thank you for your calls, and you can also tweet at us if you're the shy sort, and that's at CHERIDIN OVO. And no, if you say something misogynist, I'll call you out. But you can tweet at us. So other positive things. You're doing this wonderful project, Teddy, and that's going to be tomorrow. What happens after that?
So after that, all the scarves are being collected. They're going to a number of different charities. We just found out that Redwood Shelter is looking to have 70 of these homemade knit scarves for gifts for the women and children at that shelter. So we're hoping to have that, and a number of other charities as well. We actually reached out to the student population because we've got a lot of students on campus who are really activists, and they're looking to do things very positive. And so I've encouraged them to come out, and if they help tie the scarves to the trees at 10:30, however many volunteers they bring out, they can also come back at 2:15, collect the scarves, and also, share the love of passing the scarves out and distributing them around Toronto and the GTA. So where it goes from that, I know I have a lot of very excited people to start next year's project of knitting. I don't know if I can continue to do this. It's a big project. It was a 3-month project. But I think there's definitely a lot of people who are on board and love that sense of coming together as women and just people, men even, and continuing to knit,
And we should let anyone listening, of course, know as well, and listening online. I know this radio station has a broad broadcast range. It goes from Kitchener to Cobourg and Buffalo to Barrie. So if you are a woman and you are experiencing violence of any sort, there are all sorts of helplines to call to, and definitely get in touch with a women's centre in your community or women reps in your own union if you happen to be lucky enough to be unionized. There's always somebody to reach out to. Make sure you reach out to them, even if you've got questions, if you're not sure. Because that's the other thing about abuse, and that's the other thing about domestic violence, is that we have sort of, it's like stranger danger with kids. We have this image of this bogey man, usually a man, but, scary individual. But no, because these are guys who can be wonderful, loving, good parents one day and abusive the next. And that's the problem women face in many of those relationships. So even if you're conflicted, even if you want to talk to somebody, do reach out. We're going to take a little bit of a break right now and do some station ID, and we will be back soon. Again, you're welcome to phone in at 416-946-7000 or to tweet at CHERIDINOVO. My name, Sherry DeNovo. Talk to you soon.
Please don't waste your pity votes on me. I have riches you could never see. So fix your side eye on someone worthier. I've got something better up my sleeve. Tuesday night down at the Monsters Ball. I've got dirty laundry on them all. And I'd crack the whip and burn down this house of cards. But my inner Cinderella calls. Sing your society song. It never changes. I will not sing along. But how did you get it so wrong? In a room of strangers. Oh, where I'm glad I don't belong. I'm not one to rage against the scene. A nicer girl there surely never been. But you take the grand prize, an egotistic acrobatic master of conceit. Too much for me, I sing your society song. It never changes. I will not sing along. But how did you get it so wrong? In a room of strangers. Oh, well, I'm glad I don't belong. I take it as it comes. No shaking in my shoes. That's for you and the truth of just who you have become. The company you keep, bittersweet on the tongue. Sing your society song. It never changes. I will not sing along. But how did you get it so wrong? In a room of strangers. Oh, well, I'm glad I don't sing your society song.
Right here, right now, every day. CIUT 89.5, Toronto. The sound of your city.
And welcome back. You are listening to Three Women here on 89.5 FM. That, by the way, was Sarah Slean's Society song. Thank you, Sarah, for that interlude. We have two women of steel in the studio. We've got Colleen Burke and Teddy Credguer, two feminists who've been talking about projects. And, of course, we also invite your call-ins. We have someone online. Welcome to Three Women. Who am I speaking to? Hello? Oops. Technical difficulty. Okay, while we're getting them up again, we'll continue talking. Colleen, you were speaking about District 6 education campaign. Tell us maybe
so
a
you
bit
were sort
about
of asking about next steps. So other things that are happening sort of more broadly in our union, District 6 is Ontario and the Maritimes, and they've got an education campaign right now on violence against women, and a lot of it is targeted at men. The things we were saying earlier about, trying to raise different kinds of men, and are trying to get our male colleagues, there are a lot of men in the steelworkers, to be aware of how all these little jokes and tricks and snide remarks and, locker room talk can really have an impact on women, can lead to, along the continuum, to sexual harassment, sexual assault, and domestic violence. And so they've been showing some very powerful videos on that. There's a PowerPoint presentation going around to lots of different locals, and also support for the White Ribbon Campaign. So that's been going on throughout December throughout the district of steelworkers.
Wonderful. So take note of that, everyone listening in. And we have Sandra Jansen on the line. Sandra, welcome to Three Women.
Oh, happy to be here, Sherry.
Let's tell the listeners a little bit about you. You're the MLA for Calgary-North West, elected in 2012 and re-elected in 2015. And Sandra, among other things, has a passion for creating safe environments for children and youth, improving public education and protecting the environment, and has been involved in broadcasting for some 25 years. And Sandra came to my attention, and perhaps to the folk of Ontario, on social media when she stood up in the House and did a very, very brave thing. We talked about this, Sandra, at the top of the hour, and that is to talk about the names you have been called since being in public life. And I took up your lead and did the same at Queen's Park here in Ontario, the legislature. And I just want to, first of all, herald you for doing that. I hope other women MLAs and MPPs and MPs across Canada take up that call, because it's shocking, right?
Well, and thank you for your words, because I listened to what you had to say, and your words were incredibly powerful too. And it's amazing to me the outpouring of support I've gotten from women across the country, and men too. But, you know, the fascinating thing was there were so many female politicians, whether they're school trustees, mayors, reeves, MPs, MLAs from different provinces, sending me notes and telling me about the kinds of language that was used against them, and there really was an enormous outpouring from women who were saying, "Yeah, I hate it too. Why do we have to come into work every day and face this kind of language and this kind of behavior?" And it took me a bit by surprise. I said those words. I was feeling a sense of frustration at what I had to face and what the women I have to work with, or that I get to work with, have to face. And really, I had no idea the nerve that I would touch in doing that.
Now, you touched on some unparliamentary language there, but weren't shut down, which is a good thing. Can you tell us some radio-worthy comments? I know they're horrendous, but I think one of the problems is that we don't say these things out loud often, so people don't get it. So what are some of the things you've been called in public life?
Well, certainly a lot of language that you absolutely can't use on the radio, but a lot of comments like you should go out and get yourself a bulletproof pantsuit, and you should be stoned to death, and you're a libtard, and it goes on and on. You should have been aborted before birth. Just a lot of language like that. A lot of very sexualized kind of behavior. And when people began a discussion about this on social media, they said, well, certainly men face the same thing. And I think, wow, when they make comments about female politicians performing sex acts on other people, I don't know of a single male politician who's had to face that. And yet I talk to female politician after female politician who tell me that is something that they've all experienced, and that's really unacceptable behavior.
Absolutely, and the same thing happened to me. Actually, everyone gave me a warm reception when I stood up around the House, independent of political party. But men and some cabinet ministers came up and said, I've never been told things like that. I mean, that's the simple reality. I mean, yes, people take issue with their positions and attack them for their politics, but that kind of sexualized, especially sort of rape talk and other talk along that line is directed at women. And it, I picture the people in their basements, wherever they are, but men in their basements. But I mean, let's hope that this is mainly and mostly talk, but it still is part of that continuum of violence that women walk into. And no wonder more women don't run for election or put themselves out there publicly. What's your thought about what we do about this?
Well, it's a concern for me, obviously, because, I talk to young women who are watching this narrative and saying, why would I want to go into public life and get that kind of abuse? sure, it's great to enter a life of public service, but at the end of the day, there's lots of ways to do it where I don't encounter the same sort of abuse. And what I'm trying to say is, please don't, allow this narrative to color everything you think about women in public life. And, one of the frustrating things for me right now is that certainly we have a plethora of politicians coming out now and saying, this is absolutely unacceptable, this shouldn't happen. And a lot of those politicians are the same ones who encourage and validate the groups who are doing this sort of behavior. So if you're a politician and there are groups online like the Rebel Media, and you follow them and you retweet them and you offer them interviews and you validate them in any way, you are actually part of the problem. And I think that if you really want to come out and do something about this, for all of those online groups, for all of the Facebook groups where people who are angry and have misogynistic and hateful things to say gather, you should be out there denouncing those groups. So it's not enough for you to come forward and say this is terrible. I think you need to lead with your actions. I think you need to show people that real leadership is standing up to the people who exhibit those kinds of behavior and saying, I will not allow my narrative to take place on those websites where people like that gather.
Mm-hmm. And I think, one of the comments on Facebook was, well, confront them. But the reality is, and I'm sure you found this too, Sandra, is that you could spend all your day doing that. I mean, I think after something or other that happened, my staff ended up blocking and deleting about, 60 people. I mean, that was a lot of work that day. If you actually took one on, my goodness, that would be 4 days worth of work. I mean, they would become, which of course is part of what they're after, really. I mean, do you find that as well?
Well, there's always that question that you ask yourself, if I engage, do I just perpetuate the problem? And I think that certainly you can look online and see some of the people who are exhibiting those behaviors and say, I'm going to block them and I'm not going to reply. But there are other people who perpetuate those behaviors who are in leadership positions, and I think that we have every right as female politicians to call them out on their behavior. Don't stand up and denounce with everybody else if you're going to support the kind of people who exhibit this behavior. So if you are a politician and you don't keep good track of your Facebook page or your social media, and you allow people to gather there to use those platforms to make hateful comments, then you are a part of the problem. And I think hopefully more politicians are understanding that they have a responsibility to set a tone. So if you're at a rally or if you have a Facebook
and we just
Twitter
heard
account,
about one that went on in Alberta where
right.
Rachel Notley was they called out, this is a leadership candidate for the Conservative Party, told her she should be locked up. Yeah. Or the chant was out and he did nothing to stop it. Yeah.
Well, and even if he didn't say the words, certainly, there were hateful messages at that rally, and not a single leader, political leader at that rally stood up and had the courage to say that behavior is wrong and inconsistent with our values. And so when you don't stand up and say that, then you are basically letting people know that kind of behavior is consistent with your values.
Yeah, I have to say that in the one instance I did take somebody on Twitter and asked him to apologize because, again, I knew who this person was. I mean, this was not a troll. This was a person out there. There was incredible support, and eventually he did apologize, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's the kind of wisdom to know when, but what a shame, I say that, and I always think of our daughters and granddaughters, what a shame. I mean, I actually thought this should be something of the past, not of the present, sadly. Any parting words? What are you going to do from here on in about this?
Well, I'm going to keep speaking up. I think support the women who are out there doing this good work. I think that's important too. I'm going to continue my work amplifying other women who have important things to say. I think that's incredibly important. And I'm going to use my time on the side to nurture and encourage the careers of young female politicians and political hopefuls, because that next generation of leadership We need them to come to the table. They are critically important to develop good policy. And, in this day and age where we worry about a very negative, far right-wing kind of element that is coming into politics, for us in Alberta, that's a threat, I'm going to continue having those conversations with young women and saying, tell me how I can help you make a transition into political life, because it's worth it.
Well, rock on, sister. Thank you for all you're doing.
Thanks,
Take care,
Sherry,
Sandra,
you
and
too.
thanks for being on Three Women.
Cheers.
That was Sandra Jansen, again, the MLA for Calgary-North West. She did something unprecedented, as far as I know, in Canadian history, and stood up and talked about the name she had been called on social media and other platforms simply for being a woman in politics and being a public figure. And hopefully will spark something, because I stood up and did the same, and people take notice. And I think part of it is actually saying what's going on, because I think part of the problem, and I'm going to come back to the two wonderful women I have here live in the studio, Colleen Burke and Teddy Credguer from Women of Steel from United Steelworkers, talking about, of course, in light of tomorrow, which is December 6th, the 27th anniversary of the massacre of L'École Polytechnique of women. We're talking about violence against women in all its forms. But I think in particular, this has been a shameful topic in history. Women don't talk about it. They don't talk about the names they're called. They don't talk about rude things people say to them on the street. They don't talk about it when their husband slaps them around. We just, you keep it on the down low. Do you think that's part of the problem?
Yeah,
Eddie?
absolutely, I do. And I applaud you both for speaking out, naming it, and drawing attention to it. I think the more you have people who are mentors, are leaders, are women saying, no, this happened and this is inappropriate, and taking action. What she was saying there about not taking action, that's where we fail sometimes. We accept it, we let things go. And I know when Colleen was talking about the video that's going out and really calling us to raise our voice, to be considerate, to speak to our husbands about being considerate, our brothers, the men in our lives. This video really was, I couldn't handle it. It really made me have to go home and take a hot bath. It was quite upsetting. But that same weekend, I was...
And what video was that?
It's called Dear Daddy, and I believe it's British, and it's... sort of goes through, it's a female voiceover sort of going through her life from him bringing her home in the car when she's born to her adulthood, and making the links between things that happened to her, the boy who attempts to date rape her, the abusive spouse, all these things, and linking them to this loving, caring father who still participates in this male culture of sexist jokes and sexual harassment, and making these links that, oh yeah, this guy you joke about in the locker room, his son is the one that raped me at the party. And it's a very difficult to watch video, but it's excellent, and it's a great way to get men to think about, men who've never committed an act of violence at all and would never consider it, but to think about how they may be participating in perpetuating this culture and changes that they can make.
And we have another woman calling in right now, Honey Novick. Honey, welcome to Three Women.
Thank you. Good to hear your voice.
Absolutely. And again, you're a feminist who've been doing amazing things, and you've organized and produced an event called Women Voice. Tell us about that.
Woman Voice actually was created by two writers in Parkdale. At the time, there was the Partisan Gallery. And what they wanted to do in response to the women that were killed at L'École Polytechnique in Montreal was to have a platform where women could find a voice and use their voice and become empowered through their expression, whether it's actually vocally or through dance or through song or through artworks, whatever, just an expression of who that person is and what it is that they want to say in a way that would be respected. And I was one of the initial artists. I'm a vocalist and a poet, and I was invited at that time in 1990. And I thought it was such a good thing that I asked if I could take it on, and I've been doing it since 1992, actually, consistently, 24 years.
And you also taught singing at Sheena's place too, which is formerly a support place for mainly girls living with eating disorders and body image issues, which
That's correct.
is part of patriarchy.
Now I do voice yoga at the Secret Handshake Gallery, and that's a gallery that was founded by and for artists living with schizophrenia.
At voice yoga. Now that's wild.
Isn't it?
What does that look like or feel like or
You come
sound
next
like?
Monday, December 12th at 2 o'clock. It's basically the work that I did at Sheena's. I've been carrying it on at the Secret Handshake, and that's I create, first of all, I bring interesting tidbits about either the voice or empowerment or creative expression, and then we do some vocal exercises. It could be singing a song, making noise, and then each one is given the opportunity to perform, whether something they've written, something they like to sing, it doesn't matter. And we do it in front of one another. It's a very safe space. It's not relegated just to females. It's an opportunity to really explore creativity. And because I do teach singing in voice, I can offer tidbits about breath, about stance, about phrasing, about something that might sound good for the person that is singing or reading a poem. So it's just another way of making our society's tapestry a little bit richer.
Wonderful. And honey, Women Voice, this is happening tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
And where is it
10 o'clock,
happening?
Also at the Secret Handshake Gallery, 170 Baldwin Street upstairs in the Kensington Market.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on and letting folk know about your work. Thank you, honey.
Oh, thank you, Cherry.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
So many things happening around the city on December 6th, which is a good thing. It's important that we not forget that day. And getting back to what we were talking about in terms of prevention. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to leave on a hopeful note because it's going to be a pretty dark and devastating topic. What can we do? What can everybody do, both with their children and people in their lives from here on in to prevent violence against women?
Well, I think the theme that's come up a bit throughout is women supporting women. So whether it's through different initiatives like this or that one-on-one support to a friend, I think being able to reach out to someone to let them know they have someone who can help them. And it might be something formal, like trying to get them into a shelter or get them counseling or hands-on support, or it might just be a shoulder to cry on and someone to talk to. And I think that is very important because the less isolated someone is, the easier it may be for them to get out of an abusive relationship. And I think also just talking and naming it again and again and again and just getting it out there, I think is really, really important. So whether talking about missing and murdered Aboriginal women, which people have swept under the rug for years and years and years, talking about that crisis means it's raising awareness, it's getting on people's radar outside Aboriginal communities into kind of mainstream white Canada, that people are paying attention to this. And I think, incrementally, every little bit is going to help make a change.
I remember one of the first visits I made. I was women's critic 10 years ago when I was first elected, and went to Victim Services on College Street. And the work that they do, if anybody's interested in volunteering, it's a good place to start if this is an issue that moves you, because they do a whole training for volunteers. But these folk actually go out on calls with police to the sites, and it's amazing to know the work they do. And their funding, of course, typically has been cut year to year, and they do more with less all the time. But to be part of the solution there in a very real way in women's lives when the police arrive at the door, which is something. And men, we were talking about boys, and Teddy, we were talking about boys, because that's, not to let it go, that sexist comment or that joke, not to do that stupid, dumb smile that people plaster on their faces when they hear somebody being an idiot. But to confront it and to do something about it.
Absolutely. I think every inaction isn't action backwards if you don't take that action. And so the example I was going to give, after watching that video, I was out on the weekend. I was at a birthday party. We went out for karaoke. There was a young woman who was incredibly drunk, and people were helping her around the karaoke bar. And then at one point, a large man had a hold of her and was walking her out of the building and down the staircase. And I paused, and then I couldn't stand it, and I chased after him, and I grabbed her, and I looked her in the eyes, and I said, "Do you know this man?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's my boyfriend." And the man said, "I've been her boyfriend for 10 years, but thank you." And there were other people in the staircase, and they all said, "Good call, way to go." Now, I didn't say, "Why didn't you ask? Why didn't you do that? Why did I have to come running over here to do this?" But what I did feel was a sense of, it planted a seed that maybe next time when they're watching, a young woman who is clearly not able to take care of herself, to stop and say, "Do you know this man?" Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's just about taking those little actions every single day that it comes up, not expecting someone else to do it for you.
Or just some stupid comment.
Or
And
comments.
There's not a woman alive who hasn't heard a stupid comment. And the problem is, as I said when I started up in the house, is that these comments erode your soul. And so the tendency is to kind of withdraw and pretend you didn't hear it and walk away. But, if you can steel yourself to actually confront, and not all women can do this in all situations, but if you can, and particularly if men can do this with other men, because you're right, we live in a patriarchy, and men listen to men more than they listen to us. So it makes a huge, huge difference.
And if you can't do it in that moment, take the time to gather with those that are supportive to you to share that experience and be healed by it. I think there's a lot of power in just coming together with friends and other women and other supporters just to say, that wasn't okay.
Yeah, and even if it takes a while. I mean, I've had situations where, you're sitting in a room and something untoward happens, and it takes a while to process it. And when you process it, and the next day I'll send out something and say, having thought about that, this is what I'm thinking, So it's never too late. It's never too late. Colleen, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point, because I think in a lot of cases when this kind of thing happens, it's just shock. You're just, oh my God, I cannot believe I just heard that. And you're so shocked and processing it, you don't have a comeback, you don't have something to say. So yeah, I think you're right. It's never too late to raise it, to deal with it, to say, you know what, that was not okay. Yeah, and I think in a lot of cases, women try to take the high road. I'm not going to engage that online troll. I'm not going to talk back to the guy who's whistling to me on the street. I'm not going to engage my call. I'm not going to dignify that with a comment. And that, is a defense mechanism, and I can totally understand why people do it, and I've done it. But I think maybe times are changing, and now it is time to turn around and call it out and make that person feel bad. Like, this is what you've done, and it's not okay. And I think that's happening more and more, and you see it with people responding to, online trolls, the things we've been talking about here. And now you see Twitter even starting to look at its policies to say, well, maybe we should be shutting down these horrible racist, sexist trolls that are deliberately attacking people. So I think a change is slowly coming, and it's all incremental, but every bit is a step forward.
Absolutely. And you've done some wonderful, first of all, talk about that film, mention the name of it and where people can maybe see it.
It's called Dear Daddy, and I believe you can see it on the USW.ca website under education. I think it's there.
You'll find it
yeah,
on the web.
But I think if you go to YouTube and Google it,
yeah.
It's very, very powerful. I would say 4 or 5 minutes long, maybe, and it's excellent.
So good learning and training tool for young boys. And the project that you're engaged in.
Yes, so I hope that everyone comes out tomorrow at Hart House Circle, 12 Hart House Circle from 10:30 till 2:30. We're having a display of probably around 180 to 200 scarves that have been knit by staff, friends, family, even faculty on campus who got very excited about doing this art installation for December 6th. And we will also be uniting with the U of T and having a commemorative ceremony at 2 o'clock with the laying down of 14 roses and an Indigenous drummer and a moment of silence. So it's kind of blossomed into this beautiful, it's not just us, the union, but it's us, the U of T, it's all of us, because we're all, people on campus that deserve dignity and respect.
And District 6 again, that campaign?
Oh, District 6 throughout this month has been supporting the White Ribbon Campaign and also doing workshops, PowerPoint presentations in various locals on violence against women. So educating about the issue, where you can get help, educating about the proposal of trying to bargain language around support for victims of domestic violence in the workplace and things like that.
And maybe, Colleen, just a shout out for the White Ribbon Campaign if people don't know what that is, because not everybody does.
Yeah, I haven't been involved in it myself. I guess the White Ribbon Campaign is men working against male violence. And so this is something that started shortly after the Montreal Massacre. I think Jack Layton was one of the people who spearheaded it, and it's been going on for several years.
Really important. So if you're a man, this is the month to do it. Certainly tomorrow's the day to do it. Wear a white ribbon. It shows that you are thinking about these issues and that you care about them. Sign of great solidarity for women, too. And women take part in something tomorrow. I think at Queen's Park we usually have a minister's statement and a response in the House and a moment of silence, which we do every year, which that'll be happening too. I'm sure this is happening in various workplaces across the province. But I mean, importantly, I think what we need to do is to take that then back into our homes, our workplaces, everywhere for the rest of the year. And remember, it's not just about killing people or domestic violence of the physical kind, but it's also online violence. It's also what you say, how you say it, how you treat people. That's something we should be on guard for every day. Last words, Teddy. How do people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
Oh, they could probably contact the USW1998.ca. I'm on the website, and that's probably the best way. But I mean, the best way is to come and see me tomorrow at 10:30 at 12 Hart House Circle. I'll be wearing a red coat, representing. It's not a red dress, but it's a red coat for the missing and murdered Indigenous women.
So it's tomorrow at 10:30.
Tomorrow at 10:30.
2. Okay.
10:30 until 2:30.
Until 2:30. Okay. So if they don't have 10:30 till 2:30, what's the best time to show up?
That's the time that I'll be there, between 10:30 and 2:30.
But the ceremony is happening
at 2 o'clock.
At 2 o'clock.
That's
okay.
right. And if anyone wants to reach Teddy or reach the union, find out more about what we're doing, it's info@USW1998.ca. That's our main email.
And Honey Novick, that you heard phoning in about her work, that's just www.honeynovick.com. And of course, Sandra Jansen, the MLA for Calgary-North West. She's on social media like most of our politicians are. You can find she's up to, and I love to hear from you too. So if you have ideas for further shows, comments about this one, do email me. You can reach me on Facebook or Twitter at CHERIDINOVO. Sherry DeNovo. Want to thank Lisa and Aaron, our formidable techs behind the glass, who've really made it all happen today. And remember that tomorrow, December 6th, is a day to commemorate women and to think about violence against women and to do something about it. Thank you, Colleen. Thank you. We're out of here. Thank you, Teddy. Thank you, everyone. Till next time.